What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and this video is actually going to be full of some really good news as well as some bad ones too. But the further we go in, you'll see that the culture war is actually starting to turn more and more in our favor. From the collapse of ESG Investments to Kathleen Kennedy trying to quicken the release of the next Star Wars, which is doomed to fail, and a comic book shop owner getting dogpiled on by woke comic weirdos for saying the quiet part out loud and more. There's a lot to go over, so let's begin. Firstly, I want to speak on the current meta around ESG, which in this case, if you're unaware, ESG stands for Economic Social Governance. It's a new made-up currency that dictates what investors are more willing to spend their money on when it comes to investing. The more you increase your ESG by pandering, putting a chick in it and making it gay and lame and all of that, the higher you get on the leaderboards. Then these investors look at those leaderboards and go, well, this company has a high ESG, so if I invest there, my ESG score will rise up too, and so on it goes. It's a major reason why you're seeing so much pandering in the last 10 years especially. ESG has become in a lot of ways the new meta, so whenever you hear some guy in a suit spew words like more inclusive or diverse, he's saying that to look good so companies he represents get higher ESG scores. Now that you're caught up on what this nonsense is, I have some really good news for you. It turns out ESG is not going very well for anybody. Uh-oh, who could have guessed that? It turns out actually in the last year alone across the entire planet, ESG investments have cost the companies in our modern world around $5 trillion in investments. That's right, going woke has quite literally caused the entire investment sector to lose more money than what the company Apple is worth in its entirety in 1 year alone. ESG investments have dropped from $35.3 trillion in 2020 to around $30.3 trillion in 2022. Which is, yes I know, still an absolute insane amount of money regardless. But as reports claim like this one from Daily Mail, ESG is losing an average of around 5% of investments year over year since its inception. It's also why recently you had stuff like the Game Awards happen, which was a travesty that rejected speaking on the thousands of devs who got laid off. But instead they brought celebrities on stage and gave awards for things like Games for Impact. Which, by the way, is an award that can be translated to, this game pandered so goddamn hard we made an entire award category about it. If you unfortunately sat through that 3-hour-long award show that was more ad placement than actual dev celebration, you'd notice that a lot of the people on stage kept saying stuff like diverse and inclusive. Which yet again shows that these investments have permeated and infiltrated every known facet of the world's institutions. Video games, especially, are pandering like there's no tomorrow. And ESG-infused nonsense like Alan Wake 2, for example, won big at the Game Awards. Even though, if you look at the actual sales of the game, it tells a completely different story. It turns out, even though every reviewer out there slobbered on Alan Wake's sausage when it released and praised it for being so inclusive and diverse, the sales speak otherwise. And to prove it to you, the game released in October 2023, and Alan Wake 2 didn't even break the top 150 played games in its release month. So yet again, it just proves that even though you pander and do things like call your game Alan Wake 2 but make the main character a diverse woman of color instead, doesn't mean shit when it comes to commercial success. Sure, the game reviewed well, and the Game Awards especially promoted it like crazy from a live performance and showered it with awards, but again, Alan Wake 2 is the gold standard of what these ESG investments were all about. Just pander as hard as you can and as often as possible, even at the expense of profits or player satisfaction. I actually platinumed Alan Wake 2, and I thought it was one of the worst games I played all year since it was more a TV show than a video game. I gave the game the benefit of the doubt, and I wanted to see it through before I gave my own opinion on it. And my feelings of the game actually got worse the longer I played it. As the enemies were lame, the levels were constantly reused, the gameplay mechanics felt lackluster at best, and the game sidelined its main character for most of it. And call me whatever you want, but when I sit down to play a video game, I want to play the game, not watch it more than I'm getting to do things within it. So congrats to Remedy, you pandered your way into critics' hearts, but it looks like when it comes to the actual paying customer, not many people actually bought your product. And the reception and fate of Alan Wake 2 is oftentimes how these ESG woke things end up going. The people who get free codes or exclusive access love these things, mostly because, they don't have to pay for it. But like always, when it comes to actually supporting these diverse and inclusive pieces of media, these woke morons never show up. They didn't show up to save the Marvels, they didn't save Wish even though it was inclusive and pandered, they didn't even save The Little Mermaid or anything else. Ultimately, these decisions are just leading to a duality that is splintering the paying customer and the critics who pander down the middle almost always. Spider-Man 2, for example, pandered like crazy, and hilariously, it won absolutely nothing at the Game Awards either. All that pandering, like playing as a deaf girl, or making players forced to watch a gay student while removing their player agency, or turning Peter Parker into a cuck and sidelining him for miles, and even the critics who drank those ESG smoothies couldn't be bothered to give them a crumb of an award. So, congrats to Insomniac on losing player trust when it comes to their future games by showing they will destroy any goodwill or relevancy in order to bend the knee, and I genuinely laugh knowing they won nothing for it anyway. And circling back to that report on ESG, it turns out the investments from American companies alone when it comes to pandering has dropped from $17 trillion to around $8.4 trillion recently. Which is, yes, still an absurd amount of money, but you don't have to be good at math to see how much companies are scaling back already. The Daily Mail interviewed the executive director of Consumers Research, whose name is Will Hild. And he says the collapse of ESG is, in his own words, startling. Will said, "The market for ESG bonds decreased significantly in the past 2 years, as state leaders from across the country have fought back against the injection of woke politics into the bond market. Also, to give you some more lore, the economic boom of ESG and woke identity politics hit an all-time high in 2020, where investments rose more than 20% during that single period. Which makes sense, since when you look at all the things we've been suffering through from identity politically driven remakes and games that pander, all of this stuff was a part of that boom in 2020. But as the Daily Mail puts it, but the breathless pace of the ESG boom that characterized the previous decade appears to be winding down and even reversing as ever more traders and fund managers sour on the asset class. Will Hild also just plainly states in the article during his interview that the investment in woke content is simply a bad investment for everyone involved, which I mean, he's out of line, but he's right. And finally, in this report, they finish by saying that they fully expect the massive decline in investments in pandering to get worse in 2024. But of course, this isn't stopping the nonsense parade from continuing, since we have this article from thatparkplace.com titled, "Rumor Kathleen Kennedy expediting Daisy Ridley's Ray movie, Disney executives terrified of another The Marvels failure." According to this newest rumor, the new Star Wars movie that absolutely nobody wants is being spearheaded by Kathleen Kennedy into getting made as soon as possible. The reports claim Kennedy wants her Rey sequel movie to start production as early as April 2024. Oh, that's really soon. She also wants the budget of this film to be around $220 million, but Disney's executives are trying to convince her to lower it to around $170 million. And remember that this film will be directed by Charmin Oboy Chinoy, who also directed such hits as Miss Marvel for Disney+. You know, the show that was the least watched MCU TV show in Disney's entire history, featuring a character that nobody cares about. So Kathleen Kennedy is sticking to her guns and proving the Panderverse right, as she throws a Hail Mary to ensure her feminist force's female future comes to fruition at all costs. This entire scoop comes from YouTuber WDW Pro, who's been an insanely reliable source for all of these leaks, and they said, and I quote, "She is allegedly in a very big hurry to get this movie into full-on production that includes trying to reserve locations very fast, out of the strike, as well as getting everything tucked away and done and put into place. They want to move fast. Still, I am told not to expect this film out until at the very earliest late 2025, but almost assuredly 2026. That means that even when this comes out, it will still have been basically a decade since Disney made money with Star Wars. Disney executives are very worried about this because of the Marvels. And here's where that worry comes from. The Marvels is unlikely to break $100 million at the domestic box office. It is an unbelievable flop. Now, what did the audience say about Captain Marvel for years? They said we didn't want to go see Captain Marvel. We went because you told us we had to see what was going to happen in our favorite movies. And then, because it was not a good movie, now we dislike this character. And then the audience celebrated when Captain Marvel was not in other movies very much. And then when Disney said, no, she's popular, here's the movie, go see it, here's the sequel, fans reacted poorly. Rey is magnitudes higher than that, because the way that Rey works is that when The Force Awakens came out, fans were told, you've got to see this to see all of your original characters that you love, and that didn't happen. And then they were told, you gotta go see The Last Jedi because you've got to see actual Master Luke training Rey, and that didn't happen. And then they were told, you gotta go see The Rise of Palpatine because you got to see how this actually plays out. We got a super secret plan to make all of this worthwhile, like we're going to redeem all of these characters, and then that didn't happen. That's 3 big movies that people were forced to go see where their favorite heroes were desecrated and where Rey was elevated. And I think the Disney executives know this could actually be worse than the Marvels, end quote. And I can already hear some people saying there's no way a mainline Star Wars film can flop. But then again, a lot of people also said the Marvels would be a hit, and look what happened there. Captain Marvel made $1 billion thanks to the hype of Endgame, and without that same hype, the Marvels made barely 20% of what the original film made. And I agree with WDW Pro, Rey is universally disliked far more than Captain Marvel is. Rey is, in a lot of ways, the blueprint of Disney's destruction. She is what popularized the phrase Mary Sue and conveys a lot of what's wrong with this new age way of creating characters. Far too many properties these days are replacing legacy characters with strong female ones, and it never works. It didn't work in Star Wars, or Indiana Jones, or He-Man, or Alan Wake, or even when they sidelined Peter Parker for Miles and Mary Jane. This shit never works. I mean, it's a big reason why stuff like The Witcher on Netflix bombed too. All of these franchises have just become vehicles for these weirdos to hijack so they can push nonsense. And people have caught on to it, and it's no longer working as well as it did before. And I actually agree with the Disney higher-ups here. There is a real possibility here that this Star Wars Episode 10 movie ends up making considerably less than Episodes 9 or 8. We already know it'll have diminishing returns anyway. Force Awakens made $2 billion, then Last Jedi did $1.3 billion. So there's $700 million less there already. Then Rise of Skywalker made $1 billion, or barely $1.1 billion, so again, there's more diminishing returns. And when you compare Force Awakens to Rise, that's almost half the profit they've made slashed and gone. Now you think in a world, post all these Disney Plus shows that have been ruining Star Wars and putting it in the dirt, from Ahsoka, Boba Fett, and Mandalorian the Cuckboy Season 3, which have all had reduced viewership numbers, I mean, it all paints the picture that this movie will not resonate whatsoever. I mean, dude, the plot synopsis already allegedly leaked for this Episode 10 Star Wars film, and it says, the sequel delves into Rey's courageous endeavor to restore the Jedi Order, where she assumes the role of a mentor to 2 promising students, a girl and a boy. As her training progresses, it becomes evident that the girl possesses extraordinary abilities, destined to emerge as the future leader. Like, of course the female student is going to be the leader and next hero, cause the Force is female now anyway. And I guarantee you that this future female student will be lame, gay, and diverse as it gets too. And that young male student will probably be white and straight and will end up being the villain because this has to pander at all costs. And like I already showed you how the collapse of woke investments are happening, this movie is just proof of this dying meta. It is the epitome of ruining franchises for the sake of ESG scores. And Disney has already lost an enormous amount of money due to these sorts of actions already. And when you factor in the whole Disney was bribing the Florida government thing that I reported on in my last video, the question remains that can Disney afford another year of flops? I wager they can't. But Kathleen Kennedy is obviously hell-bent on pushing this no matter what. And then on the other side of Disney, you got Marvel, which has been losing money as well. Apparently, Captain America 4 is being completely reshot because its test screenings were somehow even lower than the Marvels. And the movie apparently features a sequence where Disney Marvel reenacts the January 6th incident where protesters went into the Capitol. And the villains of this Captain America 4 movie, at least prior to reshoots anyway, were basically gonna be Make America Great Again Trump supporters coded, and the entire movie would be a pandering mess. From having an Israeli superhero to Sam Wilson telling white congressmen to do better again. And then you got the comics side, which the entire American industry only operates within 9% of the profit shares of the entire comics pie, with Japanese manga devouring the other 91%. Then Glenn O'Leary, who's been running a comic shop for 30 years, said this via his YouTube channel that it's the fault of the comic writers today. So let's hear him out and watch this clip.
These new writers don't have the love of comics like these older writers had. And all they care about is, how can I put myself in the book? No, we don't care what you would do if you were Iron Man. We don't care who you are. You're writing Tony Stark. You're not writing yourself in a book. If that's the case, write your own comic with you in it. No one will read it because nobody cares. People grew up, growing up loving Peter Parker, loving Miles Morales, loving all these Captain America. We don't need you to put your input in it. Just write Steve Rogers. Don't write Steve Rogers. What would Steve Rogers be if I was Steve Rogers? That's not how it works. But that's again how most of these new people write nowadays. That's why most of the stuff is shit. Because we don't care what you would do, because we don't care about your life whatsoever. Just write a book, get paid for what you do, get paid for what you're supposed to be doing, and make it a good story.
And Glenn's right. It's also why so many modern comics have become word salads where characters just sit around in diners spewing paragraphs at one another. As Yellow Flash put it in his videos covering the same topic, this is because this is how these comic writers self-inserted depict themselves within comics. All they do is sit around eating and complaining to other comic writers who are also having a hard time making anything that resonates with readers. Instead of having iconic fights or creating captivating new characters, they use their opportunity to just vomit walls of text instead. Ever since Glenn O'Leary said what he did about the state of comics today, the woke writers came for him and started to insult his appearance. And funny enough, none of these insults that were thrown his way actually talked about his problem at the core of his argument. Because these writers know whatever they say to defend their choices goes against and gets dismantled by what Glenn has said. And again, like the collapse of woke ESG investments or brands like Star Wars, comics have been dying for years too. And many comic shops are failing to even survive because there's no reason to buy anything that comes out. And these comic writers who are attacking Glenn here are morons. Because without people like Glenn who operate these brick and mortar shops, the products that these writers make have considerably less places to be sold. So they're essentially attacking the hand that feeds them because these comic shop owners are sick of the diminishing returns, and the worrying reality that they could be closed down soon because of the hubris of today's current day writers. One writer named Jamal Iqbal said he's gonna be real shocked about how all comics have been written and how writing in general works. His business is dying because he refuses to change with the times. But this makes zero sense. The times are bleak, dude. The current age of comics is akin to a dark age. Because these stores are so full of product and no one is willing to buy any of it. Even when it comes to online sales, these comics are failing, so what is Glenn supposed to do? All he can do realistically is just sell all of this bloated stock for next to nothing in order to get rid of it. But even then, nobody will likely buy it, and that's not Glenn's fault. That's the writers who make this garbage to begin with. Then the writer of Silver Surfer Rebirth, whose name is Ron Mars, goes ahead and says the most out-of-touch thing they could say. It's not a restaurant, and you don't get to order what you want off the menu. Are you being serious? This has got to be a troll, right? Buying comics is absolutely like going to a restaurant. You go in, you check what's available, you look at the prices, then you decide if you want to spend your money on what's available. It's exactly that, and it's evident that the majority of customers are choosing to walk out of these comic shops like they would a restaurant if what's being presented to them is not catered to their taste or wants. These comic writers are so out of touch, dude, it's insane. But this is why the collapse of woke content is happening, and all of these writers and more are just parroting the same opinion when it comes to Glenn here. Because they know if they step out of line and admit that what Glenn says has truth to it, their peers will blacklist them and then throw them to the wolves. Then Mark Miller, who's created stuff like Kick-Ass, had Glenn on his YouTube channel, and Mark agrees with Glenn. And this ended up pissing off these woke writers even more. But the difference between Mark Miller and these nobodies is that Mark is actually successful. He's created tons of things people love and has made a fortune off of it, and good for him as well. Because Mark understands clearly that when it comes to the success of your product, it lives and dies by the writing within it. And by resonating with audiences and making things people actually care about, Mark Miller has established an incredible career for himself. And these writers who push woke nonsense wish they had even a fraction of the success that Mark has had, and they know they never will. because they've pigeonholed themselves into pandering and pushing things that nobody wants to read or support. These comic book writers are like Kathleen Kennedy or the investors of ESG. They're all birds of the same feather. They're all weirdos that have drank the ESG smoothie, and they all refuse to admit that they're wrong. And it's ironic when these writers say it's Glenn who refuses to evolve with the times when it's actually them who needs to evolve. If Glenn wants to have his comic shop survive, he should fill his walls with Mark Millar's comics. And maybe get a bunch of copies of the Ripperverse there too, because at least stuff like ISOM and Alpha Core are selling like hotcakes. And that's ultimately what needs to happen when it comes to the culture of the things that we love. It's clear that the stories, characters, and worlds we've grown to love will not be released by the clutches of these insane idiots. And the only thing we can do is seek out alternative entertainment by people who don't hate us. A good start is Eric July's Ripperverse or Mark Millar's comics. And I think it's also very important to keep yourself culturally aware of the going-ons when it comes to what's happening in these industries. The trillions lost due to woke nonsense is not something that happened overnight, but it's the result of years of pushing back, and it's thanks to the amazing community of viewers like yourself that these things are failing. So these investors lost $5 trillion in 2 years? Nah, that's chump money. Let's make it $10 trillion in 2024. And then let's go for $15 trillion in 2025. Eventually, through the power of community and shared pushback, I'm confident that we can change things. Keep resisting and keep asking questions. The things these people hate most is an individual who has common sense and a clear mind. So I thank you for watching. I am nothing without the continued support of the viewership I get, so thank you very much. Thanks to my patrons, subscribe, like the video, and share to ensure these companies are held accountable. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.